Good afternoon, good morning, depending from where you join us. My name is Oliver Schnittke. I'm the director of the Center for Global Studies here at the University of Victoria, and it's my great pleasure to welcoming you to the session on a book launch with the title Erdogan, a graphic biography, the rise of Turkey's modern autocrat. And we are very privileged to have the author and the illustrative artist of this graphic novel here with us, Can Dundar and Anwar. So welcome. Also the publisher, who's been based in Vancouver, Robert Ballantyne. Welcome as well, Robert. I'm very thrilled to be able to do this. I'm joined by my colleague here, Fazil Ahmad from the University of Victoria. I'm going to introduce her and our speakers in a second. But I would like to take this opportunity to very briefly tell you about how this book, the themes it addresses, very much is in line with some of the concerns of the work that we've been doing here at the Center for Global Studies over the past years. We've looked at the transformation of democracy, the threats to what we consider democratic governments over the past years. And what you see is across the world, we just had elections in the Netherlands, we just had them in Argentina. What you see around the world is a rise of authoritarianism and a backsliding in the democratic quality of the regimes that we see, a creeping tendency to introduce more authoritarian rule, and those that come to power to use the means to secure their position, to also, in a way, silence opposition, and with this, to undo what is constituted for democracy, a vivid civil society, an independent judicial regime. And we thought, when we saw this book, how appropriate it is to think about Turkey with, on the one hand, a very rich history of democratic renewal, a vibrant civil society, but on the other hand, you have a very long tradition also of military coup and authoritarian tendencies at the same time. And I think Erdogan himself, when he came to power, first as prime minister, then as president, he in a way encapsulated this very ambiguous legacy in terms of democratic rule, coming in with a promise for greater social equality and democratic qualities, but then increasingly using his power to establish an autocratic kind of regime in which journalists become targets of public initiatives of trying to silence them. The independence of the judiciary has been compromised, and that we've seen a gradual evolvement into a more and more authoritarian regime in Turkey. And the idea of looking at the man who has orchestrated this. I'm sorry, the video was cut short a bit. The downloading didn't quite work as well. So let me introduce Can Dundar more fully. Looking at his life, he has done so many things, wearing so many hats. He started off primarily in working with newspapers in Turkey in the 70s. At the same time, working for different TV stations, publishing books. I thought it might be a mistake, but over 40 books published in Turkey on different aspects. So he has been prolific in terms of his writing, but also his journalistic works. And you heard that he became the author-in-chief of Cumhuriyet, one of Turkey's leading newspapers. And when he published an article on how the Turkish Secret Service was engaged in illegal arms trade with jihadists in Syria, that became a real political issue. He was put on trial, sentenced to prison. He experienced being attacked violently in the street, and that led to his decision to go to exile to Berlin, because the environment in Turkey became as such that was life-threatening to continue there. But if the Turkish authorities thought they can silence him with this, they were definitely mistaken. He went to Berlin, Can Dundar, and continued his distinguished career as a journalist, working on a memoir that has been translated into many languages. And this book now that we see is another more evidence of him continuing his journalistic work, this work as an author, to shed light on the situation, the political context, society in Turkey. Has been awarded many, received many recognitions from Reporters Without Borders, PEN, the Committee to Process Journalists. And I think what you saw, the first part of the little video there is how the threats to journalists, independent society actors has been a motivating factor, and the way that it affected him deeply personally, but also intellectually, to think about how democracy can survive without these critical ingredients of independent journalism, independent intellectuals holding those in power to account. That leads me to Anwar. Welcome as well. Wonderful to have you. You could tell that he shares this sense of political persecution with Can Dundar. Anwar is an Egyptian Sudanese comic artist and political cartoonist. And when the so-called Arab Spring exploded, 2010-11, there was such hope for a greater and deeper democracy in the region, but it became very clear to Anwar soon that working during the final years of former dictator Hosni Mubarak, that there wasn't the kind of liberty that was promised. And when more and more authoritarian tendency manifested themselves in Egyptian society, he also left, and in 2019 was deported, and also now lives in Berlin. So two artists, journalists meeting in Berlin, considering how to address the rise of authoritarianism and forms of dictatorship, then coming together to produce this book. So first of all, big congratulations from my side. I very much enjoyed reading the book. It's such as a political scientist, such a refreshing way also to present this.
Thank you.
Let me now hand over things to my colleague Fazla Mat, who is a PhD student here at the University of Victoria. She also is a distinguished journalist. Over the years, she has worked in Italy with a strong interest in democracy and journalistic freedom in Turkey, working also with NGOs, the Osservatorio Balcani e Caucaso Transeuropa in Italy. And she, in her academic work, also is now interested in forms of media freedom, hate speech, disinformation, and how journalists can survive and find support and continue their important work in an environment that is so adverse to them. Also through transnational links, Europe, you described how Berlin has become also a hub for you to find support. So very much what you experience is the subject of Fazla's research, and Fazla was kind enough to provide a short introduction to the political context of Turkey, and then we come to the interview with you two. So hang on for just 1 second, and then we start this process. Fazla.
And hello, and thank you very much also from my side for being here, to both of you. I just want to say just two things about Erdogan as a political leader in Turkey. And I'm going to start to say that he's probably one of the world's most divisive and controversial political actors. Just for those who might not be very familiar with his career path, Erdogan first came to power as prime minister in 2003 as the leader of the Islamist-rooted Justice and Development Party, the AKP. He spent 11 years as Turkey's prime minister before coming to becoming the country's first directly elected president in August 2014. A referendum, which was held in April 2017, narrowly backed, allowed him to switch the political system of the country from a parliamentarian system to a presidential system of government, and this significantly increased his power. In May 2023, despite, again, predictions that he would lose, he was re-elected president for another 5 years. And so Erdogan, to his supporters, he's very, in a way, he's a very praised figure. According to them, Erdogan has brought Turkey years of economic growth and international prestige. But on the other side, to his critics, he's an autocratic leader who is intolerant of dissent. Erdogan's government is criticized for the absence of checks and balances, the deterioration of the rule of law and human rights, as we were just mentioning, and the targeting of perceived government critics and political opponents, including journalists, which, as you well know, forced many to a condition of exile. In the present situation, independent media in Turkey operate mainly via online platforms, with authorities regularly ordering removal of critical content and persecuting journalists. According to International Journalist Organization, around 60 journalists and media workers are currently in pretrial detention or serving prison sentences in Turkey right now, accused of terrorism offenses. In addition to this, thousands of ordinary people every year face arrest and prosecution for their social media posts, typically charged with defamation, insulting the president, fomenting hatred, or spreading terrorist propaganda. But the Turkish political context hasn't been always like this. The early years of the AKP period have long been described as a period of democratic transition, characterized by a move away from military tutelage. Initially, the AKP presented itself as a conservative Democrat party devoted to advance Turkey's democratic standards, while also integrating it with the global capitalism. It fostered the rise of a conservative middle class and pursued Turkey's EU membership as well. However, from 2013 onwards, and especially after the attempted coup of 2016, Turkey has witnessed one of the most dramatic democratic backslidings in the world. While Erdogan is often considered a charismatic leader who has come to be globally known for his activism in the international stage and the authoritarian tendencies manifested by its government, little attention has been paid to the story behind Erdogan, the steps that have led Erdogan to Turkey's leadership. So I would like to start our conversation asking Can Dundar, why did you decide to focus this book, to write this book on Erdogan before Erdogan came to power?
Well, because, I mean, everybody wants to know him, especially in the political circles. And as we all know, the personal history can give a lot of insights and about a personality, how it emerges. So I guess you can see a lot of signs about his personality from his childhood. So he's coming from a poor family. He's a very religious family, and he is an ambitious guy, uneducated but ambitious. And when you trace his history, you can see the signs of today's Erdogan. So personally, we want to understand his personality via his life story. And also we try to focus his rise to the power. And then we see not only his ambitions, but also the global conditions, the political structure, the party system, and all of this helped him to come to power and stay in power, and including European forces, including US policies, including the party system in Turkey or the military coup, etc. So I guess the book is full of lessons for all of us.
Okay. Then let me maybe ask you, why did you decide to choose a graphic novel to do this? And what has been the process that led to it?
First of all, there are lots of books about him, and there are many biographies written about him, so I don't want to add another one. I try to I wanted to try something new, and this is a new type of journalism, I guess. And it gives you the opportunity to give a kind of a background, a kind of a undersea, behind this, what's going on behind the scenes, etc. And especially to reach the young generation, it's a huge opportunity, of course, because they love graphic novels, and using it, we thought it would work. And another reason is Erdogan hates graphic novels and humor. So we wanted to use this as an opportunity to make him angry, because he puts cartoonists in Turkey in jail. So of course it's not a revenge, but we just want to show the flag that we are still here, and putting us in jail would not work at all.
And
So in
Anwar,
addition to this,
yeah,
I would love also like to, because like the medium of comic journalism, which is, it's not super new, but also it's, I think it has, when we're talking technically in that sense, it also has an answer to the dilemma of journalism right now. I mean, it's a kind of a visual investigation, long form. So we are talking about 320 pages. And it has fundamentals, like, I mean, so it's not like an easy work to do, either from a journalistic perspective or from an artistic perspective. So the comic journalism has definitely like fundamentals that has been laid. For example, like especially in the States, you have Joe Sacco, for example, who has did like a really magnificent work and laid these fundamentals. Now the book is translated into almost 7 languages. More accessibility, definitely, different audience, and from France to Egypt to Turkey to Greece even. So it added to the, if we can call it like the penetration power of the ideas that's brought up in this book.
Just to correct something, unfortunately, we couldn't reach Turkey. We
Yes.
published the book in Turkish, but unfortunately, it's not allowed to get into the country. That's unfortunate. Really, we pushed a lot. We sent thousands of copies, but it came back. But in the end, we decided to put it online, and people, we give the right to people to download it for free. And last New Year Eve, it was a present from us to the Turkish people, and 30,000 people all of a sudden, in a couple of weeks, they download and read the book. So that was the idea. We are fighting against censorship.
I'm wondering, have you heard directly or indirectly from Erdogan himself? You know, has he reacted to this novel, or have you, or you know, you might have heard some rumors?
No, really, I'm dying to learn this, if he read the book or not. But
Right.
a friend of mine was called by a prosecutor, a journalist, and she saw the book on the table of the prosecutor. So most probably they are working on it.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to go for the next?
Yeah. I was wondering, Can Dundar is a journalist, Anwar is a political cartoonist. So that was basically the first time you approached this type of medium, right? I wonder how this kind of new medium affected the way you generally tell your stories to your public.
To me or Anwar?
Both of you,
Both.
if possible.
Yeah,
Please
okay, go ahead, Anwar.
Yeah, so I've been, like, for me especially, like, I've been working in journalism, in the field of journalism. I'm an artist, but I've been working in journalism for a decade and a half right now. So for 15 years, I've been producing daily political cartoons. And it's a total different technique and way of production. So in your daily political cartoons, and I have been producing political cartoons in the very difficult times and periods of, for example, the Egyptian history, at least, for example. I mean, I started before the Egyptian Revolution, and so I witnessed the Egyptian Revolution. I witnessed a military regime. I witnessed a theocratic religious regime. I witnessed another military regime again. So always the daily political cartoon is over, if we can call it, like it's overcharged with emotions, instantaneous reactions, and interactions, while going into the very lower pace of graphic novel. It definitely shapes the way you could tackle the same issue. I mean, when my political cartoons, I have been tackling the same issues, exactly the duality of the military regime and the religious or Islamic or theocratic regimes. This has been tackled in the same. But once you are going through a different medium which has the lower pace, I always say that graphic novels are almost like a low frame rate film. So it's a film, it's a movie, but it's a very low frame rate. This definitely pushes a more slower way of dealing with the issue, a more deeper way of dealing with the same issue. So when I'm talking about the military and a political cartoon, I'm waiting for an instantaneous reaction. I'm using it as an instantaneous catalyst in the political sphere and the political scene in Egypt, for example. But when I'm talking, when I'm producing this slower medium, quieter, like longer lasting, seriously, because the lifetime of a political cartoon is just could be the newspaper. Some of them definitely you're supposed to remember them, but when it comes to a book, it's like evergreen, I would say, in that sense. I don't know how did you enjoy it, Jan?
I did. Really, it was a challenge, of course, for a journalist. Never experienced something like this, but it was like writing a scenario in the beginning. So trying to visualize what are you writing about. But most difficult for me was not writing it as a graphic novel scenario, let's say. But most difficult for me was writing about a leader who put you in jail and send you in exile. Imagine that you are writing the life story of a leader who destroy your life in a way, so because of him I'm in exile, because of him I was attacked and survived from a gunman, and because of him I spent some time in jail, and because of him I lost my job, my country, all my properties, etc. So, but on the one hand, this is the fact. On the other hand, I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. I have to be objective as possible, as objective as possible, and kind of a neutral. And this book should be a fact-based, objective book. So this was really challenging because I was fighting with myself. And on the one hand, I'm angry with him. But on the other hand, there are facts that I should be stick to, and that's why from the beginning I was talking to myself, to the other guy, saying that, "Come on, you're a journalist. Don't put your feelings in it and be objective as possible."
Thank you for sharing this with us. And that your last point touches on our next question. You're wondering about how you went about to do the background research. You go deep into the biography of Erdogan. Anwar, I think in the video you say you know him better than he himself, right? So that's how do you get there, right? How did you in a way get all the material to come with with something up like a full biography of someone who probably is secretive when it comes to some of the personal stories about him?
Yeah, from my own perspective, because definitely this book took us like almost 3.5 years of work, of research, and then writing, and then doing visual research, and then even during the production, from my own side, there was also a personal research of this persona. So I had folders, for example, like for there's different techniques of research. I have folders for Erdogan himself during his different ages. Because it's not about just drawing the person. It's not like only portraying what was happening in this certain period of time. It's also about like jumping to a deeper layer of this personality. How does he shout? When does he shout? How does he move? What does this reflect from his personality? Is he strong? When is he fragile? When he becomes like really aggressive? So I mean, like, it's a deep qualitative analysis of this persona in that sense, I would say, during his childhood till becoming, and also there's a different layer of doing visual researches of the places that this story has been taking place in Turkey. I mean, definitely, and I owe a lot of I'm really grateful for all of the online resources that I have found from tourists that has been in Turkey, for example, back in the 70s, and just posting random videos. They never thought that this random video would be used as a documentation of this exact period, because they captured a protest here or there, or they captured the sense of the street here or there. Something that had took like a lot of time doing the visual research and this persona research, definitely. In addition, definitely to the research that already Jan can be talking about when it comes to the text and the historical fact checks.
Yeah, for me, I've been following him as a journalist for the last quarter century. So he was the mayor of Istanbul, late 90s. So that's why, I mean, I'm so familiar with his personality. And of course, I was taking notes and I used those images in my mind. But of course, I read a lot, all the biographies written about him, some memories, of course, newspaper pieces. But we worked with a research team, so they have worked a lot in the library, and in the end, yeah, I guess if he read the book, he would really surprise. He would be surprised how deep we research on his life. Most probably, even he couldn't remember all those details about his life.
Were you also able to interview people who have accompanied him in his life, or to speak directly? That was probably more challenging, right? So it was more.
It was very difficult. Yeah, it was very difficult. So it's almost impossible to talk to people around him. There are some people who already left him, so they have some memories. But talking to me is quite risky for many people in Turkey. I'm an Erdogan's terror list. He put me there a couple of years ago, so 2 years ago, in fact. By the way, I should thank you for inviting a terrorist to this prestigious meeting. But I mean, talking to a terrorist would be really risky for many people in Turkey. That's why even talking to them on the phone was almost impossible for me.
Also, at the same time, it's important to say that a big part of this comic journalism is the fact checking, for example, that every single data, I would say, has to be double checked from the text, from a text wise, and even from a visual wise. I remember we have been even like checking so in the end of the day, we were not there in these places. So there is a part that's added from our imagination, but this imagination, it's not like a kind of a free imagination. It's based on as much evidence as we can get, as much notes that we can get. We had like even discussions, me and Jan, about which kind of house that he would have been living when he was young, which he had been living when he was young. How did it look inside the house? What kind of walls did we have? So when it comes to comic journalism, it's not like the artistic freedom where you can draw or can portray whatever you want. Even these kind of small details has to be fact checked.
Staying in the area of comic journalism and political cartoons, I wanted to ask both of you, because you having experience in different authoritarian settings, what would you say that is the role of political cartoons in challenging the rule of authoritarian regimes, and what kind of effect can they produce in those similar contexts?
Catastrophe. Somehow. This is what I have witnessed that I have never experienced, because they were. So I started political cartooning, I think, It was 2007 or 2005, for example. Exactly 2007, yes. And this was the years in the preparation of the Egyptian Revolution, or as so-called the Arab Spring. Huge social and political movements happening, and we were always accused. I'm part of the new generation of political cartoonists in Egypt. Those who I would claim that we brought the political cartoons back to the scene, because before it was only, I don't know how it was called political, it was cartooning, that praising the regime. So we were part of the new wave that came to oppose the former regime. And then came the revolution. And this was like a big moment where we saw our cartoons that has been, as I said, catalyst somehow, definitely with the new wave, hold in the protests in Tahrir Square, for example. And this was something that we could never imagine or could never believe. It's fast, it's sharp as a bullet, definitely. So that's why it creates an instantaneous reaction, an interaction that would be better than thousands of words. Yet at the same time, it's dangerous. It's dangerous for us in that sense, because like after the second day when Hosni Mubarak, for example, talking about my personal memories in that sense, when the first day when Hosni Mubarak went down, we thought that it's done, the democracy is here. And then we discovered that it's a very long way, because we fall in different traps afterwards. Theocratic, as I said, and then military regime. So I have witnessed this. I have witnessed like how political cartoons were a very important part of the free press, and that led to a dictatorship to fall in Egypt. And definitely, that's why all of them, they hate us. Like either Hosni Mubarak or al-Sisi in Egypt right now, or Erdogan in Turkey. They know the political cartoonist by name, and they hate them by name, I would say. Good news, bad news.
Maybe I can interject as a scholar of social movements. I can, from evidence is very clear that any kind of revolt, deep political transformation relies on iconic images, on pictures, because they encapsulate the claims so well, right? And they can be, as you described, they can be used in the act of political oppositions, right? And so that is, far more powerful than the academic journal articles that we write as academics. But it is really, this ability to bring a particular issue into one image, right? Yeah, one critical way of, in a way, condensing the aspirations, the anger, the political will, into this, and that can be, as you described it, Anwar, right? It's almost as sharp as a knife. These things can be very powerful in this respect. It's hard to measure exactly the impact of things, but it needs, these forms of articulation that are captured also in images that can be shared, right? And cartoons in particular can be very powerful too, as we know. That's why they are hated by those in power.
And I wanted to ask Can Dundar, Turkey also has a very long tradition of political cartoons. And actually, in one of your videos, you also mentioned that one of your colleagues, I believe he's Musa Kart, he has been jailed for some time because he depicted a cat that has the head of Erdogan. So in Turkey right now, in terms of this, the satire expressed in political cartoons, do you think there is, what type of climate do you see there right now?
Unfortunately, we almost lost this tradition, this huge tradition, because of Erdogan's pressure. As you said, satire was very important in Turkish politics, and for decades, it was the way of resisting the pressure from the government, and they were really powerful. Especially the cartoon magazines tradition was really so powerful in Turkey, and humor has become a kind of a weapon in the protesters' arms, and during the Gezi protest, and we saw a kind of a joy there. But then as you mentioned in the beginning, after the Gezi protests, especially 2013, Erdogan has got more power, and then he starts smashing all the opposition together with those magazines. And unfortunately now it's almost none of those kind of magazines. And it is very difficult to make fun of Erdogan. Really. I mean, it's so risky. As you know, you cannot do it in Putin's Russia. I guess Sisi's Egypt is the same. So that's why those guys really hate criticism, and especially humor is the kind of very risky thing to do against them.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in your novel is also that Berlin has become a city that connects a number of exiles. I was wondering, both of you live in Berlin and you met there and you started this collaboration. I would like to ask, what types of opportunities and challenges have you encountered there for your journalistic or artistic work?
I think
Anwar?
Jan should be starting. No, please.
Yeah, go. Okay. Well, there are lots of advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are really the city brought us together, and we found a very multicultural atmosphere here. And for example, our collaboration is a very good example of it. So we found each other in Berlin thanks to this corrective company, a journalistic company. So now we are together with many friends and colleagues all over the world. I mean, now we have Russians, Ukrainians, Afghans together. Imagine wherever there's a crisis, you will see exile journalists from there. So it's a huge opportunity, of course. Now we have a kind of a global exile community in one room. And we are learning from each other a lot. That's the biggest advantage. But the problem is reaching our audience, of course. I mean, imagine you are writing a book, but you cannot reach to your audience. And we have a radio station running 24 hours from Berlin, but our website is banned in Turkey. So those are the typical problems, and you cannot finance it because, I mean, if you are against the government's rule, so you have not only problems with your own government, but the government of the country you are live in, because I mean they are also they don't want to destroy their relations with Turkey, for example, or Egypt. So sometimes they want you to be careful about what you are doing. This is also a problem, and it's difficult to find people to work with because it's risky, right? And how about reporters in Turkey? You are running a media outlet without reporters, so it's funny. So you own your stuff in Germany, but when it comes to Turkey, it's risky to work with you, and it's very difficult to find people ready to take this risk. So those are the problems we are dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also definitely, especially in being in Berlin, was one of the places where a lot of pro-Erdogan supporters are here. It makes it even more riskier and riskier, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yet also on the other hand, for me, for example, like sometimes I was asked this question, especially in Egypt, by the way. So what do you do? What do you have to do with the Turkish politics? This is exactly what I have to do with the Turkish politics, because the Turkish politics is the Egyptian politics. Because Can Dundar is, and Anwar is another form of Can Dundar. And this is something that I have never experienced, understood as in deeply understood, without me being here. I could always theorize about this duality of the political Islam and army, authoritarian and theocratic regimes, but I see the result. It's me, it's him. And once you meet together,
Yeah. That's true.
understand the common denominators between us, between our cultures also, especially here with the proximities between Egypt and Turkey. They are so big, definitely. But here you can understand the common denominators that's between us and the Germans also. Those who are having the same values. What are the common interests? What are the common values that we share? And then you discover that your question is not only Hosni Mubarak, your question is not only Erdogan, your question could be bigger and like worldwide, have a worldwide answer than this. As you have mentioned, exactly like what's happening in Netherlands, I don't see it totally different than what's happening in our region. What's happening in Argentina is not far away at all. And you discover also that the techniques of these authoritarian regimes are exactly the same everywhere, I would say. And it's not coming from a romantic, no, it's just that the analysis, the culture of nurturing the fear, the culture of nurturing the xenophobia, the culture of nurturing the fear from others. It's literally the same from Trump to Sisi to Erdogan to North Korea.
Yeah, in fact, we are learning from each other, as I mentioned, but the autocrats also learning from each other and using their techniques very well.
Right. It's wonderful to see how you gain inspiration and motivation from this transnational group of artists, of journalists, of political activists, right? So that's it is good to see that there are these places where they can interact and collaborate. But I'm still, hopefully it's not too personal a question. But how do you keep up your motivation? Being so far from the country that you are so intensely interested in it. As Can Dundar said, right, your audience is hard to reach, right? It must be you work in this kind of, in a way, in a very specific social space, right, in which you're connected or not really connected, and you see similarities, but then you're so inhibited in terms of reaching the audience that you want to speak to directly. I'm just wondering, you get out of bed in the morning and say, I keep up the energy to do this in spite of being so far away from this, right? It's yeah, but just if you like to answer or
yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, when I was in jail, I was writing on the walls, showing them that you cannot stop a writer or journalist. I mean, even if I'm reading my own things in the morning, so this is a kind of a responsibility you feel. So Turkey was not an autocracy in the beginning, so it turned into an autocracy, and unfortunately we are losing our democracy. So we have to do something. This is our duty, this is our responsibility, and you feel it. And I have a son, and I don't want him to grow up in an autocracy. And Turkey is still not a total kind of a autocratic regime. Half of the people still struggling, and in the last election, half of the people voted against him. So it's more or less the same. I mean, this 50-50 is valid in US for Trump. It's valid in England for Brexit. Unfortunately, they divided the whole world into two. That's why, I mean, it's a tug of war, and we have to be in the right side of this war.
Yeah. So we're going to come soon to the audience, let them chime in as well. But Fazil, I have one more question for you, and then we open it up to hear also from those who've been listening to our conversation.
So knowing that you have started your collaboration and you have produced this amazing graphic novel about Erdogan before he came to power, we were wondering what is next in your future, and if you're already planning on working on something else together or not.
We start working on the second episode of the book, second volume, which is his years in power. It's more known, of course, last 2 decades, but we will try to show the backside of it. I mean, what was going on behind the scenes. So it will be really maybe more interesting for the world audience. What do you think, Anwar? I mean, in fact, we were waiting for the end of this regime to finish the book, but it seems that we will have to wait a bit more. So
we were having a hope Yeah, during the election,
Exactly.
during the last election, that we could write the final chapter in a happy way, if we could say it this way.
Yeah.
So,
So the problem is we don't know the final pages yet.
And you also have other projects that are running right now that are
it's being a theater play here in Berlin also, with an adaptation like the first volume itself, which is very interesting. It's kind of an adaptation on the persona and on the graphic novel. I mean, like on the person of Erdogan, because like again, this autocratic persona, this dictator, the persona of the dictator, you could find it everywhere. You could find it in theater, you could find it in work, you could find it in house. How this seeds, the abstraction of the seeds of this persona is applicable to different fields, I would say.
That's right.
And definitely, like, this book opened my appetite for the comic journalism. So on the other hand, like, I'm planning like to do a comic journalism, a big comic journalism fellowship here in Berlin for other comic artists and journalists from all over the world to come and be producing such books also. Not about Erdogan. It doesn't have to be only about Erdogan.
See next time. Anwar.
Yeah. That's less interesting, by the way.
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Yep. One last question, and more connected to current affairs, maybe, and relating to the recent visit of Erdogan to Berlin. It was an official visit, and we were wondering whether this type of visit, how does it influence people in exile like you living there, and more generally, how these kinds of relationship affect the relationship between the two countries, between Germany and Turkey?
Yeah, of course, it's difficult because, as Anwar mentioned already, there's a huge Turkish community living in Germany, and most of them supporting Erdogan. That's why imagine you are living with the people who thought that you are an agent or terrorist, and that makes life very difficult to live in a city like Berlin. That's why, especially when Erdogan here, that makes it more difficult because you can feel in the air this agitation. I mean, I can give you an example. Last time he came to Berlin, I wanted to go to his press conference as a journalist, and I didn't think that it would cause that many big problems because the Turkish sides before the press conference thought that it's a provocation, and it was very difficult for me to get accreditation. And in the end, I insisted. I said that, come on, I'm a journalist, so I have the right to follow the press conference. But I mean, you are not a journalist in their eyes, so that's why they thought it's a provocation. And in the last moment, they told me that if you come, Erdogan will not be coming.
Mm-hmm.
So they protested the press conference, and then I said, okay, I gave up. And in the press conference, he called me as a terrorist and giving my name, etc. So if your president calls you as a terrorist, of course, I mean, supporters getting the message, and it's like a duty for them to destroy the enemy. So that's why, of course, it's very difficult to live under these circumstances.
Great. With this, let us open it up to those who have joined us online or in the other room. What we would suggest, and Jody, just left a message here for you. You could raise your virtual hand, and so we know you would like to come in. You can leave a question in the chat as well if you don't do it directly. Anyone who would like to join us and to join the conversation with our distinguished guest today. Anyone who would like to start? Who would like to break the ice? Is there any question in the room? I think, Leah, you could relate this to the room. Yeah.
Questions, anybody?
Yeah.
Peter has a question.
Yeah. Please.
I don't know whether, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder, this is partly a political question, but partly a question about your work. What are the trajectories that you see for Turkey to come out of this autocratic regime? That's the political half of the question. And the question relating to your present work, to this book, is whether you've ever thought about a graphic novel, in this case, that would present not a factual reconstruction of what happened, but a utopia that could trace out one of these trajectories. So here's a path of hope for Turkey in this case. This is how it could happen that you go past this autocratic phase. So half political question, half graphic novel question.
Yeah, I mean, recently we lost an election in Turkey in May. That was really a kind of a turning point for many people because we were really hopeful. Then I realized how difficult it is to get rid of an autocrat via elections while he's controlling almost all the powers in Turkey. Like he's controlling the parliament, he's controlling, of course, the government, he's controlling, most importantly, the judiciary and the media, academics, business. So the army, the intelligence service, the police force. So you are challenging an autocrat who controls everything. And it's between his lips if you are in jail or you are free, and he can easily send his opponents to jail or ban from politics. So then we realized a bit naively that it's almost impossible to beat an autocrat via elections. So if it's not with the elections, then what? Uprising? I mean, you saw it in Egypt, in Turkey, so in Gezi protests. So millions were uprising against him, and he smashed it via police force. And there was a military coup attempt after this, and it was smashed as well. Thanks God, I'm not in favor of a military government, but instead of a military government, now we have a police state. So which one you choose? So that's why there's no democratic line for the society, for the country, and I'm really kind of pessimistic for the short run to deal with this. And if there's no political solution to this, and people now start talking about biological solution, how long he can live more, but now he's trying to change the constitution so that the system can live even after him. That's why it partly depends on the global system, partly depends on the internal political balances. But unfortunately, it's not so easy when they come to power. It's very difficult to get rid of them.
Could I just follow up a little bit, Can Dundar? You said, the biological question. Do you have hope in the youth? In a way, the graphic novel that you wrote seems to be geared also to a particular cohort of younger people, that maybe read and perceive information differently. So was this also one of the thoughts that you're talking to a new generation, that might not know all this, and that lacks information, particularly in Turkey, and then that there's some hope attached to this transformation, of a younger generation?
When you talk about Turkey, you should always think about two different Turkeys. So one Turkey is really a kind of a modern, educated, and kind of opponents of Erdogan regime. Unfortunately, they are leaving Turkey nowadays, and there's a huge brain drain from Turkey towards the Western world. And unfortunately, Turkey is losing their best minds. On the other hand, the other part are really kind of poisoned with the education system of the last 2 decades that Erdogan created. And most of them see Erdogan as a prophet or the unbeatable hero, you know. So it's very difficult in a democratic system, say, coping with those kind of generation poisoned by Erdogan's propaganda machinery, and you can even see it in them in Germany, and they are even in here in Europe, they are under the impact of this propaganda war, and it will be very difficult, this, you know, this confrontation even in Europe.
May I ask a question if there aren't others from the audience? What do you think should the role of democracies, democratic countries should be in trying to give wider voice to critics of authoritarian governments, and what type of action would you expect from them? I would ask both of you.
Anwar, you've been silent.
I'm just contemplating, like when it comes, for example, like to Egypt, Germany is one of the biggest supporters of by selling arms and by selling to this regime. When it comes to the refugee crisis, both of them, by the way, talking about like how the autocrats are learning from each other. They are learning from each other how to play cards. Democracies are helpful for their own people sometimes. When I'm talking about the States, when I'm talking about like Germany, when I'm talking about Europe, the Europeans or those who live in Europe, they are the ones benefiting from the democracy. But when it comes to the regimes talking with each other, the benefits just starts talking, you know, and sometimes these human rights comes in second place. Because like the sales of the guns or the making sure that the borders of Europe are safe comes in the first place for the democratic society to sustain. This is, I would say, the Western way of understanding it. Keeping the problem outside, it proved by history that it will not help the boundaries to be safe, help the borders to be safe, or help the treasuries, like the money to get higher. You know, it's just like it's delaying the bomb. So rather than using the human rights as tokens that we would be using in front of the media, but when it comes to the real talking rooms or negotiations rooms, it comes in a second place. I think I would ask for this policies to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, his last visit to Berlin, Turkey's human rights record never mentioned by the German chancellor. So it's sad to see them. They are ready to sacrifice their values for their interests. And Erdogan is a kind of creature of the Western interest, I guess. I mean, you remember late 70s, after the Russian invasion to Afghanistan, the Americans decided to use the Islamists against the communists. So it was the case more or less in Turkey. The generals wanted to stop the communist rising, and they used the Islamists. And then now they have to deal with the Islamists. So in the beginning, the Western world gave him a huge credit, but he used democracy to destroy it. And now we don't have the leverages to defend our democracy. And when it comes to the Western attitude, unfortunately, I guess they don't care anymore what's going on in other countries, but they want to protect their borders from the refugee flow, and this is their priority. And they want to make business, you know, with those guys. And they thought that, okay, there are some elections there and people supporting them. And if people supporting them, oh, why we should care about this? And let's make business. This is the mentality, as far as I see.
Yeah. Oh, and you alluded to the recent visit again, you know, of Erdogan in Germany, right? And that was, it's, you know, you can see high-stake politics, international politics, vested interest, and Erdogan has been good in presenting himself as, you know, the mediator between different forces, right? Yeah, so he has made himself important in this respect, right? And now people draw on him and said, all right, we can't challenge him, you know, he might be a mediating force in the Middle Eastern conflict and so forth. So I think this strong man image has helped, and that's of what you describe also in the novel, right? You know, so this, you know, guy, he is strong, he decides, you know, he imposes his authority, right? It flies.
That's right.
It's, you know, and Can Dundar, you mentioned this, you know, I follow a bit the discussion of the Turkish diaspora population in Germany, right? That those who came originally from Turkey can still vote in Turkey. There's a huge degree of support for Erdogan, higher than even in Turkey itself, which is bewildering in a way, because you have access to all the information, and still, you know, that you know, there are things that are troublesome to see, that even with access to information and living in a relatively free society, you support, you know, an autocrat, right, for whatever reason. But that's okay.
Yeah, he's an expert of using crisis and turning into opportunities, and he did it during the refugee crisis. He, you know, stopped the refugee flow to Europe and got some money out of it. And now we have 4 million Syrian Iraqi refugees in Turkey, and huge problem, of course. And then he used the Ukraine crisis, and he used the NATO crisis. I mean, he made it a crisis for Sweden and Finland's membership to NATO, and he wanted to use it as an opportunity. And I guess nowadays, again, with Hamas and Israel, he smelled the opportunity. And Germans, I guess, thought he can be helpful, at least to maybe release the hostages from Hamas, etc., because he has good relations with Hamas. That's why always they have a reason to, you know, not, at least not to disturb him, you know, not to annoy him. And that's why he, in the last, for example, visit, he made his show, and they gave this platform to him, and he, I guess, he went back to Turkey as a hero. You know, he criticized Germany's Israel policy in front of the world's eye, and during the press conference towards the chancellor's face. And it was impossible in Germany to make a propaganda for Hamas, but he did it in the prime ministry building.
Yeah. Thank you. I know we've kept you already for over an hour, and they're very thankful for your time and dedication. Maybe we could go to the online question here. Do you want to read this, or?
Of course.
Yeah, this is from Vees.
So it's a question from Veys Aktaş, I guess. I have recently watched a documentary video on Deutsche Welle YouTube channel, Mr. Dundar with Aslı Erdogan. They both share the same fate, 2 exiles in Germany. Also, as Anwar and Can mentioned, it is not just limited to Turkey, unfortunately. There are a lot of journalists, authors, and voices all around the globe being exiles. Have you considered working on a book that focuses on the similarities of autocrat regimes via different people's stories all around the world?
You can see we want to keep you busy for another decade or so, right?
That's true.
Seriously, I love the idea. I love the idea. And I remember one of my very first comic reporting, by the way, the very first one that I did was about a character called, the character is an important person, like in the German modern political history, is called Danny the Red, or Daniel Cohn-Bendit. So Daniel Cohn-Bendit was one of the icons, definitely, of the 68 movement. And what attracted me, by the way, to him, that he was Jewish, he was German, and he living in France, and he had to leave France because he was accused of, you are not French, you are German. So he was deported. And I did this during the Egyptian Revolution. I did this comic reportage about the repression and how some political movements like the 1968 could go really bad, and which leads to, like, the leaders of themselves of these movements would end up in exile or deported. 10 years later, I was the one who got exiled and deported because I was accused of being a traitor and not being Egyptian enough. So that's why I think I started my career with this. I'm afraid that I will be ending in the same way, telling the stories of my tribe of exiled journalists.
You do.
Yeah, great idea. But I mean, before the graphic novel, I guess we have to come together and share our problems and find a way to work together, fight together, because we have the same kind of problems. We are fighting against same kind of guys. We are fighting for same kind of ideals. So why not coming together, maybe in exile? And if they are learning from each other, we should learn from each other. We should help in a solidarity, maybe umbrella organization. So that would be, I guess, a kind of a mission waiting for us in front of us.
And maybe Fazila will be able to help you with some of her insight, because that's exactly what she's doing, looking at transnational networks that could be of help. Right? And so it's been such a pleasure, meeting you online. A big way of congratulating on your major achievement with this book, but probably more generally, your courage, your determination to carry on also your work as journalists, as artists, as political activists. I can only imagine what it means to be in exile and do this kind of work. So with a great degree of admiration and from the West Coast of Canada, I really wish you all the best for your time in Berlin. Very productive couple of years coming your way. You've heard already a couple of ideas of what you could do, so there's no limit. But I think the last suggestion of how much we see similar trends of authoritarianism, threat to democratic life around the world. And I think, Anwar, you put this very vividly, how similar it is around the world. Sure, it's all national context, but the measures, the threats to our liberties, we can compare across borders, and we can act across borders. So with this, and let me also say a big thank you for Robert Valentine as the publisher in Vancouver. It's wonderful to work with you to launch this today. And Fazila was, being spearheading this initiative here at the University of Victoria. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, and all the best to you in Berlin.
We are grateful
Thank you so much
for your contribution. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you.
So much.
It was a pleasure for us.
Ciao.